Okay, so making open source work in the public sector. This is where you learn how. The full thing. So my name is Gar Mac Criosta. I'm a senior researcher at RISE, the National Research Institute in Sweden, and I've been working almost full time the last 7-8 years with public sector, specifically both researching and supporting their adoption of collaboration around open source. So this is a very interesting panel to have the opportunity to have a conversation. I have questions, but I actually hope this to be a very more like interactive session. So please raise your hands all the way out. Don't feel any Swedish hesitation of I mean, everyone's thinking together. So if you have questions, raise your hand or speak out loud. Nothing is too rude. But let's walk us through and maybe please introduce yourself with one sentence and maybe say why open source is important for the public sector from your perspective. Starting with you.
Yeah, no pressure. Thanks, Johan. So my name is Gar Mac Criosta. I work as an architect in the health service in Ireland. So for anybody who's not from Ireland, the HSE is like the NHS, is the easiest way to describe it, right? For everybody who lives here, you know it, and everybody knows it, everybody knows somebody who works in it. In terms of the open source piece of it, I guess to go back to the point, you're not going to find out how it works in government at the moment because it doesn't, right? But it's an inspired stumbling forward of trying to figure out, and there's a bit of persistence in terms of how we, Denise is laughing because insistence and persistence that we have to kind of...
And personal career risk.
Yeah, personal career risk. Yeah, it's so it's more or less continuing until apprehended is the strategy that we're going through at the moment. Tom?
Yes, so I'm Tom Sadler. I'm a senior principal engineer at the BBC as an open source industry engagement and inner source expert. So at the BBC, we build the vast majority of our public service digital offerings ourselves in-house, websites, mobile apps, and streaming services. And yeah, all that's built on open source. So we operate in a lot of ways, we operate like a private tech company, and similar to private tech companies, we can be better open source systems. We certainly consume a lot of it, as everyone does. We create some of our own, like an okay amount, and we're starting to get better at contributing upstream. And I think, for thinking about the public sector angle in particular, really, what's important to us, I think other sector entities, is the sort of collaboration, interoperability side of things. I think public sector's got a public remit, and a part of their purpose is to play nice with others and collaboratively.
I'm John Odin, and I know we were just talking about who would know what HSE is. So I actually went to college here. So I was in College of Commerce Rathmines before it got renamed to TUD, and I was in NIHE before it got renamed to TCU. And I've worked in a bunch of different companies in Ireland, and then in, I jokingly called the westernmost city in Ireland, which is Boston. And then I was in San Francisco and Silicon Valley for 27 years now. Mostly startups. I did Mozilla, just to talk about open source stuff, Mozilla and Apache Hadoop stuff. But then startups and multinationals, and then that turned into an Obama White House original US digital service team. That was my first time working in government. And if you want to talk about getting in the deep end of the swimming pool at the start of your career, that was it. Since then, I've been in a couple of state-level projects, California state projects, some federal projects. I've worked in Code for America. I've worked with an organization called Civic Actions doing federal and state contracting work. And I was an advisor at the GSA and the IRS until recently on a bunch of things, including open source technology. To me, I'm a techie. I also hack policy, written laws. I also do culture change and leadership hacking, because that's part of it too. It's about the humans. You're going to hear me say a lot of things around why are we here? Why are we even touching this thing? And how do we make this fit into whatever else is running? And what's the metric that matters? To me, it's about building trust in government and providing services to the people who depend on it. if we can do it using open source, that's even better. And there's a bunch of that. But it's all over the place. Sorry, I couldn't do it in one sentence. That's
that's a long, good sentence. So we have a lot of experience to unpack. I was thinking, like, starting with you, Gar, maybe abstracting to the level of Ireland and the Irish government. What are like the high level problems?
I'm looking around because Tony Shannon was here. I was going to call subs and say, "Come on up," and so I don't know. Yeah. So,
what's the high level problems, and is there a strategy for how open source can support the Irish government in these goals?
Yeah, so I guess I'm not going to steal your thunder. So Tony Shannon, who's the head of digital for government, is here, and the Office of Government CIO has been one of the groups in terms of driving forward on this, and it's been leveraging open source technologies. But again, to your point, John, to drive solutions. So how do we deliver something that's useful and valuable? And so we've been leveraging some of that technology and collaborating in terms of creation of some of that technology. So I think it's early stages, and I think I feel at the moment we're nibbling around the edges, and it's not a systemically, like, there isn't a strategy around it. It's not systemically embedded in the way we think about solving problems, and reflexively, just the way government changes is via public procurement. And public procurement doesn't necessarily end up in solutions coming from this stable of solutions. So it's rethinking and increasing the option space is kind of one of the things that I think we need to do. But I think a lot of it, and this is a personal perspective on it, a lot of the stuff that's happening at the moment is individuals who are motivated to try and solve problems in their own domain, and then finding each other and then bridging across into other domains. So me and Tony found each other years ago. So we play, and then there's other people we play with. But that kind of has organically grown. It's not something that, it's not systemic, and it's certainly not organized in any recognizable way from a bureaucratic perspective. So I know I didn't answer your question.
No, but that's typical way in how panels work. So
deflect and avoid.
Exactly right. No, but one thing is, I think I kind of find this general in long context is about you have to prove the value that this tool that open source brings before you can introduce it into your strategies. Let's say, for example, in the BBC, how do you prove and communicate the value that open source brings and that you are able to invest time and so on?
Yes, so in terms of building on top of open source, like, I think we've been fairly ahead of the curve when it comes to the public sector, early digital adopters. But in terms of the getting involved in the community and contributing upstream, that's where it's a little bit harder. I think one of the big challenges, public sector is often money constrained. It's like, well, why would we invest in something when we're getting it for free? It's a question that's asked in the private sector as well. I think even more so in the public sector. So we've not had any success yet with joining foundations, but that seems to be an easier sell to say, like, well, if we send some money to foundations, then they will invest that in open source projects that we're dependent on. We're contributing through knowledge at things like this, but also code contributions is a bit of an easier sell, but then there's still getting legal approval for upstream contributions is a challenge. So I think in terms of showing and proving the value, it's a constant. You need to constantly be looking for opportunities and highlighting them to the decision makers in the organisation. And you need to keep the systems and consistent, because doing it once will not necessarily get it through. So that's the other thing, like, you need to keep pushing with this stuff, like, because it is a difficult culture change, especially in old organisations that have been around for a long time. So you've got to persist, and eventually the message will get through.
I wanted to build on that and moving to you, John, because you mentioned procurement, and I know signaling and proving the value of something is very critical in the procurement, be it on price or quality, or maybe more relevant also security or sovereignty. But I wanted to ask you, based on your experience, what's the main barriers and what can you do to address them in terms of adopting open source in the context of public procurement?
So what has and has not worked for me, which is not the same as a scientific study of the world. First of all, I think a realization that, like we're all in some form or another kind of nerdy hackers, like all of us here in this room. But if you go into pick a large agency of choice, it's a compliment, by the way. But if you go into a large agency of choice and you work with people who are career subject matter experts in a particular part of government policy, they wouldn't know open source from a small red brick on the sidewalk. They just don't know what it is. And that's not because they're dumb. They know a lot about legal details I don't know. Right? It's because they have a totally different focus. But they do have an operational care of duty on data and the operational continuity of government. So you got to be able to show that whatever crazy thing you're talking about to them, you're the third person today, the other two people are trying to sell some big expensive widget that they promise is a Ferrari will cost you 5 pence and you can get it tomorrow. And by the way, it's a 5-year contract, and in 5 years they'll admit it's actually 25 million, not 5 cents. And it's not a Ferrari, it's a horse and buggy, but they're stuck with it now. And they're trying to keep government working. So they don't know if you're selling them a trap or if you're actually making life better. They just don't know. So going where you are rare and listening and being humble and asking, like, how can you help them? What's the problem that they're trying to solve? Open source may not be the solution. Often it is. But they need to know that you're listening for what's the problem they're trying to solve. And in those contexts, owning the data, like a jurisdiction owns the data of the citizens, not the hosted software provider that's using proprietary data formats. That means you can never get the data back, and they own your citizen data, not you. That's a scary situation.
It's interesting, John, you say
that's important,
Yeah, the sort of 5-year thing. I think those kind of feedback loop to show the value seems to be slower, I think. As opposed to like take something proprietary, you kind of get that instant win. It's like it's there, it kind of works. But it's only 5 years down the line you realise, this is a long-term investment.
Usually they come in, it'll be this month, but it comes in late, it comes in over budget, it comes with bugs, and then getting the bug fixes are expensive dollars or euros per minute on a change request, and suddenly it's a nightmare, and they live with all these failures. Whereas if you can show, here's the thing, and you can use it yourself, that changes the concept. And the other thing, just because you're talking to people who are not living and breathing open source, I find myself myth busting all the time. Open source does not mean the data is stored insecurely in an open box on the sidewalk, right? Open source means you can read the code and you can see what's being done. You can then deploy that open source into a secured, controlled environment with all the right checkboxes. And by the way, now it's in a data format because you can see the codes, you can see the data formats, you can export or extract or build APIs, you can do all these things that you cannot do with proprietary. But you got to explain that to someone who's been doing 30 years of whatever your agency is. And they know what it's like to be hauled up in front of Congress or have Freedom of Information Acts or lawsuits. But they don't know a computer. And so speak in their language and solve the problems they want to solve.
I'll tell you a funny story on this because it's the understanding piece. Yeah. So go back to remember COVID? So we built a digital contact tracing solution. Yeah. We open sourced it and contributed to the Linux Foundation. So there was a big announcement around we're open sourcing this. Okay, so we're going to license, we're going to do it. Press office got involved. So the policy guys in the press office have no idea.
They're another.
No idea. So can you send us a link? Because they're saying it's a press release. So can you send us a link to this? So send them a link to a repo. They opened up and said, what is it? Right? It was like, that's code, right? That's why would anybody want to look at this? So there was a complete, this total culture clash of have no understanding of why this has any relevance. Because it's not interesting to you. It's interesting to someone else. And we're saying we did it, and here's why. You've got a question?
If I can just add on that. I've also different social networks and friends. a bunch of friends of mine are medical doctors. If you want to, like, if you go hang out with a bunch of geeks in a bar talking over beer about code, now go hang out with a bunch of doctors who are talking about pros and cons of different brain surgery techniques over dinner. And I'm like, I'm losing my appetite listening to this conversation. But I also don't understand 80% of the words they use because they're using terminology that's appropriate for their skill and domain. That's totally foreign to me. And we're doing the same to others. And so being aware of that, I think, is really critical.
I think there's a question.
Yeah, please. I'm Neil O'Reilly. Sure. There were two things you said that I want to echo back to.
Sure.
And you mentioned relevance, and you mentioned working with people.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the relevance, as you pointed out, is where the barriers are. And I wanted to mention one very crucial but gratuitous piece of relevant messaging that my energy provider offers me. I want to download the last year's meter readings. And they tell me, this is a CSV file. Open that with Excel or OpenOffice or mangle it in any text editor. And they provide, for the few who know, a statement of what they can do. But they provide for the people who haven't been exposed to it yet, a statement of relevance of why they've chosen this. And it's this kind of small messaging, because there needs to be a public pull here, and not just, people, geeks working together because it's fun.
Yeah. And I think so it brings in the other opens, right? Because we talk about open source, but Denise, you want to jump in?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry. Sorry. You worked for the digital service, and if you were in the first crew, then you knew Vivek Kundra and the work that he did in DC with open data.
Yep.
For those of you who don't know, that this was a sort of groundbreaking thing in DC, 12 years ago now? Where they had all these data streams that they had just made public, 217 data streams, and they open sourced them for a hackathon. And they just invited a bunch of open source people in and said, hack away, my friends. And they got, in that one day, at least 5 usable things, but 3 that they were already funded to build privately, that they then were able to give that money to education instead. And because it was a Democratic presidential year, thank you, Mr. Obama, they made a big deal of it. And then Obama hired the first ever CTO of the country of America. Given what we do in Silicon Valley, kind of shocking that it took that long, but and the digital service, right? Doing something like that here that just raises people's awareness would be worth doing. And I mean, we had that with the COVID tracing app, but everybody was so upset about dying.
Can I finish this point and then I'll do a graceful handoff this way? And that was it's the 3 opens. So it's open source, open data, open standards, right? And I think there's a relevance to this. And there's a particular relevance in healthcare and the work that we're doing at the moment. And there's equally, so at the moment there's a bunch of European regulations that are coming into effect, new legislation coming in Ireland. So it's European health data spaces, but it's how do I make this data available to you as a citizen and make it useful to you as a citizen, and for you to have the ability to use it in other contexts in different ways. So I think some of those things are, it's kind of part of it. So the open data thing started here roughly around the same time, because it started everywhere around the same time.
Sure.
The open standards piece is kind of running through a different track. And you kind of get these bits, it's like, I've got open data, but it was all CSV files, or it was like some other proprietary format, and then you've got the standards piece that's happening. And we have this in healthcare all the time. And then you've got the open source bits, and sometimes they coalesce, sometimes they don't. And I think part of it is we seem to be kind of reaching this kind of inflection point where it's beginning to, it's all landing at the same time, where we've built a health app in Ireland, which is all built on an open stack, but consuming this like an open standards-based set of APIs, which will become kind of the standards way that anybody interacts with this data. So it's not for us, it's designed to be intentionally for others to consume. So if a health tech company in Ireland wants to consume this and plug in, great. I'm just going to say, it's not there right now. Don't get excited today. It's there, right?
Yeah.
So the intention is there to go down this particular path. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. If I can riff on the data API piece. So after Obama White House. I was in Code for America for a year,
Sure.
and they
I think
would,
I saw you there.
maybe. I was. They would do these monthly hackathons, and so here's a bunch of public data that's available. Who here cares about this particular topic? Who cares about foster adoption rates for puppies?
Right.
Or who cares about retirement pensions or healthcare, whatever? And have those people start brainstorming and hacking up something. Not going to be production grade code. It may not even ever work. Might not even be a good idea, but it might. And two things come out of this. One, you might innovate and find some things, like you said there earlier. You could actually make something happen really quickly rather than waiting for a multi-year procurement process with contractual complaints and legal delays. Two, you get people who are in the community innovating in ways you never thought of. They'll find new inventions you'd never even considered. And three, you get people believing that they can actually contribute to the operation of the country's government. Rebuilding trust in government by seeing like something's broken and I can't do anything is very frustrating. Something's broken and I can help fix it. For some people, that's a real strong dopamine hit. And you can make that possible if you share open data and then create forums where they can work together on this stuff.
But then you have to make a big deal of it, so
And
more
have
people
to
know.
let people know about it. It can't just be 3 people in a corner. It's like make people know about it. Hit the press, the monthly events, have famous people come down, Baron Tony come down and tell you you're doing a good job. And like, have it take off as a thing.
I think it's
Shut up.
let's have a conversation now. Yeah. Just to add, I think you're highlighting that an important aspect as well in considering not just open source software. I mean, considering open as a toolbox.
Yes.
It's depending on what you want to achieve. If you want to promote innovation, open data may be a way, or open standards and APIs. Enabling that you can switch out the building blocks, and in some cases open source will make sense as well. So you can collaborate with these different types of open technologies in your procurement to achieve the goal you're looking for, where open source may not always be the right option from at least my pragmatic point of view.
I think that's a really important point, because it's not to be absolutist. We've got to be pragmatic about it. Like, you got to solve problems. Who cares, right? It does the job. There's commodity pieces, fine, pay for it. There's other bits, and there's choices around it, but it's like being intentional about it and not being absolutist about it. I think is the key.
Yeah, I keep asking the question: what's the problem we're trying to solve here? And I'll always get, like, it turns out that all the people around the table have different answers, and I'll avoid using any technical words and any buzzwords, because of if we're all actually trying to solve the same thing, like reducing death and suicide rate, or as one example, or reducing the amount of time it takes a person with no money to get free food. These are two real projects. And for both of those, the answer is we need to get them food. Like, that's not a,
Just on that point, I'm conscious
problem.
Just to go back to the problem piece, and Keenan Modgy walked into the room as well. I was laughing. So this goes back to the COVID thing. So we didn't start to build an app. We started to solve the problem of how do I find 2 people who are too close for too long. Where too close is 2 meters and too long is 15 minutes. And then there was 7 different work streams working on different ways of solving that problem. That ended up being, this is the way we're going to do it. But it didn't start that way.
And looking at what everybody else in the world was doing.
Yeah.
What's the problem we're trying to solve?
Yeah.
Comes back to the value question as well. That's the point you made. The value is solving the problem.
Right. And that question breaks down a whole bunch of internal roadblocks really quickly.
I wanted to ask, show of hands, how many are representing a public organization, public sector organization? 2 hands. 3 hands.
There's this common counts, right?
How many are representing suppliers or vendors? Civil society. Some. Academia research. Open source. Open source. Majority. I wanted to return to, because we're talking about adoption and procurement, but what about, so you mentioned the COVID app and the release of it, and looking at you, Tom, because you're in kind of this maybe intersection between private public. What's your experience from both perspectives and releasing something as open source? What's the main blockers, and how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, we always get asked the question when we want to something that is this something we could actually make some money out of? Because we do the same with our content. We sell our content to Netflix and Amazon and people like that. But it's very rare that we can. So actually, yeah, it's very rare that we say yes, this is some software we can actually sell. So instead, we look at again the value of open sourcing, and this is where there's a lot of benefits, and it's both quite strategic for us, but also beneficial for our community. So, for instance, with connected TV apps, which is a relatively new technology area, we open source our framework for building TV apps back in 2012, and that did help other developers build TV apps, but it also helped drive sort of web standards for TV devices, rather than having a scenario where you need to build a TV app for LG and Samsung and Panasonic, and then if you want to build a TV app, you build 7 or 8 different apps. So that sort of fed into the sort of public goods and open standards, but also helped us push our strategy, because we didn't want to write 7 different versions of our streaming services. But we have then a public service challenge with that is we also get asked the question, well, will open sourcing this disrupt any private enterprises? So that's kind of like, I get it, like, and I know that.
Isn't that the point?
No, because our remit's about providing something that isn't fulfilled by the private sector. So if we're stepping on the toes of the private sector, then that's seen as interfering with the market with public money. So
I think that's an interesting one, because it's what problems should government be solving and what problems should the market be solving, and there will be an overlap, because there's a Venn diagram there. And in some cases the market filled something that the government wasn't doing, and when the government does do it, then it's going to substitute one for the other. But there's always going to be that friction at the edges, which I don't think it's interesting that that your mandate is not to interfere with it, which is not something that's ever, I don't think that's ever been clarified from the perspective of stuff we were doing, but I don't think we did enough of it to actually stand on anyone's toes.
Yeah, but now digital sovereignty will be all about that.
I'm not like trying to unscramble an egg, because it's everywhere.
I've seen your cooking.
Well, if you were to see it, what can you possibly, say, oh, we're over here, we're over there. You can't possibly prevent somebody doing some recombination of an asset and coming up in a private commercial sector with something that's already publicly available.
But that's good. That's a normal.
But it seems like if it's a procurement obstacle, and your strategy is to say not to interrupt the market.
No, sorry, it's the other way around, where we're producing our own software. If we would release something that would disrupt.
If you released an open source thing that would disrupt what could be someone else's private business.
Yeah.
Is this a European perspective, or is that something applicable in the US as well?
I'm not a lawyer, said quickly. I don't actually know. I do know the scenarios I've been in, it's because something wasn't working. And usually they're paying a lot of money to somebody for the thing that was not working. And so in that case, it's not so much about is it private or public, or should it be? It's like, this problem that we all care about is not being fixed, and we're paying out a bunch of money for something that's totally broken. And if that's the only choice, and then some of those scenarios, then we just keep doing. But if we can find a quick fix that will completely obsolete this thing and also fix the problem that we need solving, do it.
But it's the trigger event that drives it, because
It's the problem that needs to be solved, is the conversation.
Because we had that with the app we released last year, like the specific, because we were trying to get ahead of another program that was running and kind of act as kind of an early lead, kind of apply that piece of how do we put something in front of a person, right? And for anybody who's used the HC app, which is, it's completely not exciting. I will say it because like I'm 100% responsible for this, but the barrier to get something out the door gets significantly higher the more you do with it. And getting into an iterative process of we're going to make this better and better and better is not natural for a public service organization to do it iteratively. It's like we're going to do it in a oneer and it's all going to be done. It's going to be amazing, right? But with something like
bang
this,
effect, yeah.
so we're like and all of a sudden we're doing like, so we're at bids. So by the end of this year, right, which will be 2 years into it, it'll be good, right? But 2 years away, and you're like, oh. But actually, the barrier of getting something out, getting something published, getting something in front of people, getting people using it, learning through that process, building the muscles internally to organize yourselves to be able to repeatedly do something like that. That's the thing. And there's a bunch of people who are going, oh, well, why didn't you just go buy one? It was like, because there's no mechanism to do that, because all the stuff, like the bit of software at the end of it is not the important bit. It's all of the institutional muscles that you build to deliver something like this, regardless of what the outcome is. At the end, that's what you're learning as you do it.
Sorry, I think
it's a different thing.
Okay. So one is just one agency I worked at, as they evolved through different U.S. federal agency, as they evolved through different contracts, they set up, oh, here's this new functionality, and as part of that new functionality, there's a username login set up, so you could go in and check. That's fine. X number of years later, here's a new functionality with a new procurement contract and a new separate, different username login. Repeat this for 30 years, right? You end up with a whole stack of login systems, which, by the way, all have different teams maintaining and being paid contracts, and they're all different. So is it John in account number 1 or John in account number 2? Is that the same? So is he entitled to? And this is within the one agency, right? And are they doing the right security fixes? So this one being breached and they're not fixing it because they're not good at their homework. These ones, so dialing that down to just be like, at this point, that agency has 2 logins. They've reduced it down from over 20. That took years of account migrations and a whole tricky game to play. But the problem was that veterans couldn't see what they were supposed to get. And also the systems were being hacked. Now, one of the login systems is an open source one that's being provided out by a US Doodle Service team as an open login.gov thing. Another one is a proprietary vendor that's still heavily involved in a bunch of things, not naming any names. But it's 2 as opposed to 20 plus, right? But they can still there's plenty of work to do. It's not like any one of those companies is starving.
Just de-insutifying things.
Right, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to not use that word, but yeah, I was like, solve the problem you're trying to solve.
Cory Doctorow.
Yeah. But
What I
I'm
was
up
going
here
to
and I
say
didn't want
was
to say it.
about procurement. Fixing procurement is one thing, and that's often about hardwired language that various vendors have managed to put into the procurement system and all of that. But there's a really glaring basic thing that we learned during the COVID tracing app that is going to apply to any contract where the programmers don't work for you, but you have hired somebody else. I'll point it out. You gotta include, if it's an open source thing, the plan is to open source it. You have to include a service contract to continue the conversation with the eventual people that want to ask questions about that thing. And that's what we learned, right? So like if we can change one thing, making sure that there is ongoing interest on the part of the people writing the thing for you for hire to continue to make it an open source project. And that they have the expertise also, of course, would be the other.
And it depends on the layers and the layer, sorry.
Just to add to that, so I work for the Cabinet Office, GDS, and one of the things, like in the early days when they set up, my role was on standards, on the policies around open standards, but they had a team that was working on procurement, and they changed all the contracts. That all the vendors had to, whatever they wrote had to be open source, so that they didn't go and sell it to the next department and then the next department. But if government was paying for something, and code, it could be used by all government departments.
Paper at once.
But only if you have a contract so that you can talk to.
Right, the contract has to be written the way you just talked about.
And I think this is the sort of nuances of public money, public code, isn't it? I think, yeah, when you're procuring, you need to make sure those contracts are in place. But we're in a bit of a different situation because we don't tend to procure very much, so we're building most of it ourselves. I'm sure a lot of people would love us to open source everything and feel like we should, but that's probably a bigger argument than we have time for
the
today.
software developers in GDS had a different issue because they couldn't pay taxpayer money to spend time on contributions and working in the code. So once they were done, they would release it on GitHub, and they ended up calling it
But did everything from GDS get open source? There wasn't some stuff held back?
I don't know. I can't say everything, but that was the direction. That was the directive. Everything, as much as possible, was going to be open source.
It's also
Open
cyber
source,
concern.
Just want to go up and say that Civic Actions has developed, I won't work with John in the past, but Civic Actions worked with the GSA to develop a procurement training guide called DITAP. And DITAP is, this came out of healthcare.gov and was a realization that procurement officers didn't know how to buy digital software, period. They didn't know Agile, they didn't know how to go off and how to buy, what is the difference between buying a tank and buying a CRM? Like, it's the same, right? Of course it isn't, but they had to go off and rethink how that was done after the healthcare catastrophe, and we tried to build into the DITAP refresh that we built for GSA an opportunity to include open source in that, and also we provided a number of other open source procurement guides. So people are interested in what we've done with GSA and others, happy to share that.
I could riff on that. I know you're trying to get us at the door, but if I can riff on it, it's like that myth busting thing I said earlier. Like someone who's a deep policy expert but doesn't know the difference between open source and open data. Like just having, like one of the things that DITAP program does is get you through the basics of like, here's what these things mean. Here's why you can do, like Gar just said about like doing iterative agile deployments, where you do another deploy next week and it doesn't crash and end up in the newspapers. And that's the 5th deploy in 5 weeks that hasn't crashed. So people start to trust you. Like that iterative deploy, that's all stuff they cover in there, which is why the contracts get written much better afterwards. So myth busting, and it's important.
That's a good final remark. Myth busting, a lot of it is about myth busting. Thanks. Hope everyone got something out of this vast knowledge and experience. Thanks.